Welcome to our weekly immigration podcast. We handle all things immigration in the United States, summarize it up for you, and give you a little bit of opinion so you know what's happening with U.S. immigration. Let's go. All right, so we've got a story for you today on H1B Lottery. Basic update there. Not much going on. We've got an update for you on the H2B Lottery and some details on what's open still. There's some exemptions for the lottery. We'll go over that. We've also got the new asylum rule that came out. There's a lot of details. This new asylum rule, we will cover that. Finally, we have the Biden administration talking a little bit about how Title 42 asylum and their new program on the border should be clearing up a backlog and doing something on the border. So we've got that story. And of course, we wrap it up with questions from you guys. So let's launch. First off is the H1B Lottery. As you know, we're all waiting for the second lottery where we learn if there are extra space or cap-based cases that can be accepted. We have no news on that. That should be coming out pretty soon. Typically that happens in the May-June timeframe where they announce there's a secondary lottery, and normally they announce the lottery's already been conducted. Right now, no news on the H1B Lottery, the second lottery. We'll update you as soon as we get more. The H2B visa, now mind you, this is the temporary worker visa, has reached their lottery limit for their second lottery of the year. Now, this is a very complicated visa. It applies to specific kinds of workers in specific fields. And the fact is that there are some exemptions from the H2B numerical cap. Those exemptions are some 23,000 returning worker cases. And aside from the 23,000 worker cases, there are exemptions for individuals from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Haiti, okay? So the H2B lottery numbers have been reached. There are exemptions that you should know about, specifically from specific countries, and there's returning workers, and of course, there are specific industries that are also open to accept workers for, and that's the fish roe processing, fish roe technicians, and any supervisors who work in the fish roe processing industry. Finally, if there's any workers from the Northern Mariana Islands or Guam, there are some exemptions for those as well. So the H2B visas are done. There are some exemptions. Check those out. If you need more information, obviously leave us a comment below. We'd be happy to respond. All right, U.S. Immigration has had a lot of problems with asylum. Now, I'm going to give you just quick background so you know what's happening. Asylum is a process that falls under the United Nations Charter, which is individuals feeling persecution in their home country can seek asylum in members of the Charter, the countries that have signed the UN Charter. Okay. Now, every country has their own rules and regulations, and U.S. asylum law is old and it's had its own rules and regulations, and it's not exactly simply the UN Charter. There's actually U.S. law that talks about asylum and how we process it. Right now, things are changing at the border, and I'm going to go over those because these are big changes, and if you have somebody who's trying to get in or you know people who are in the asylum process, this is actually very important news for you about what's going on. So I'm going to hit these up really quick and read them off for you. All right, so here we go. Take a look at our screen. There's a new rule about asylum officers processing asylum applications. And they're going to do a couple big changes. So the first thing is what's called a credible fear determination. Credible fear determination is whether somebody has an actual real fear of returning home. Because sometimes people say, hey, I'm just afraid. And the officer will ask them, what's it about? And they might say, nothing, I'm just afraid of crime. And that won't qualify, okay? So a credible fear determination takes a professional who understands asylum, and what they're doing is they're doing those interviews on the border, and what they're looking at is there are some people who might be getting deported, but they might have a credible fear. So that's one thing they're adding. That's the first bullet point for you, okay? Allowing the USCIS officers to do reviews for people in removal proceedings. And aside from that, there are streamlined proceedings, and there are individuals who are not granted asylum who go into streamlined hearings with a judge, where the judge will only review people who are not eligible for asylum, but eligible for other types of programs that are similar to asylum. They're going to bump that process up and make sure people who are not eligible for asylum can still get a hearing with the judge on CAT or withholding of removal. Okay, that's a second change. The third change they've noted for us is the credible fear review process, or the screening process, is going to apply a return to the law which is more fair, and that is a significant possibility, okay? And that will also include screening for withholding removal and CAT. CAT is Convention Against Torture. It comes right out of the UN Charter, actually. All right. In addition, they're talking about limited exceptions, return to longstanding regulations to screen for eligibility for asylum and statute of withholding removal without applying bars to asylum and removal. Okay, what that means is the screening process is going to become a little bit more fair, where people who might have a hearing or might have real fears, real incidents, and done something, they're not going to remove them from the process simply because they might perhaps not meet the 1-year bar or other rules that exist, or safe harbor rules, okay? And what happened in the last few years is they started to cut asylum down and just make judgments in places where they probably should not have, because it cut away from fairness, it cut away from U.S. due process, and it didn't allow people who had legal claims to actually be heard by judges or individuals who are more trained and knowledgeable on the subject matter to make rulings. And we saw a lot of that happening, and it didn't represent the United States very well. It didn't represent our laws, and it didn't show our commitment to constitutional due process. So these changes they're talking about, specifically the administration's plan for a blueprint for a fair, orderly, and humane immigration system, are really strong changes in the right direction for something we saw that had fallen into disrepair, fallen into a place where we were not abiding by our U.S. principles for constitutional fairness. Okay, we also have some news about the Biden administration's plan to fight back on Title 42 asylum. Now, the Biden administration, again, we have some bullet points for you. Check this out, because the Biden administration is really trying to revamp what's happened, and it looks like they've really focused on the border and some of the issues that have come out of what we have seen to be completely lacking judicial fairness, okay? And what you want to keep in mind is the U.S. Constitution provides what's called substantive due process and procedural due process. And procedural due process would simply be a timing, a fair hearing, individuals who are trained to actually hear your case, and for you to have the right to just engage that process, all right? So the Biden administration is going to overhaul the system for screening immigrants, as we talked about in the prior story. That overhaul the screening process is very, very important. The things we saw, the images we saw, and some of the news stories we've heard that came out of the border were very tragic and kind of ugly. I mean, think about separating families, children being detained, children not seeing their parents for weeks, maybe even months, okay? Think about children getting ill without their parents. You know, some of these things need to be overhauled, that's the right word for it, and need to be changed. So one of the programs that are going to be rolled out very soon is going to be, it's going to start this week, is at 2 detention facilities in Texas, where they're trying to increase the number of cases heard so that they can actually reduce the backlog so people aren't detained or waiting for a long time. Very, very important, because this is one of the problems we've seen where people will be detained and held in essentially prison-like conditions. Now, these are families with young kids. These are men and women, and they're held in prisons for weeks, if not longer, and not had a chance to hear their case. To get to those cases and do those cases and reduce those backlogs is a very, very big deal. The Biden administration has described what they call an asylum officer rule as one of their big changes. They're trying to start a new system that will allow more cases to be heard by more officers and not have claims to be rejected outright by untrained professionals. Asylum officers go through a long training, and a lot of them are actually attorneys or have been to law school or have practiced immigration law. You'd be surprised how many actually licensed attorneys are asylum officers. That means they have a real understanding of U.S. Constitution. They really understand what due process means. So for this overhaul to take place, where asylum officers are going to look at cases, is very important. Keep in mind, we had some stories coming out where Border Patrol officials were making assessments or deciding things. Border Patrol officers are not asylum officers. Border Patrol officers are not trained in that regard. Their training is to actually protect the border, make arrests, and go through a deportation process that the Border Patrol understands. So, again, the Biden overhaul looks like they're going to talk about identifying individuals who may be qualified and making sure they get delivered an actual due constitutional process to have their cases reviewed by officers who understand what's going on, okay? Now, of course, there's a lot of negative feedback happening. The Biden administration is handling that very well. but at this point, the laws that they're trying to enact to shut down the border or close down asylum due process are not happening. You can see from the bullet points we've covered the main points in this case, in this news story. What you're going to hear over the coming weeks is most likely hopefully more positive stories about what's coming out of the border, how detained immigrants are being treated, and frankly, this matters a lot to me. Now, I do a lot of business immigration. I focus a lot on getting people's visas and employment-based cases. But the truth is, as an American, it matters to me because fairness and what this country represents is very, very important to me. On top of that, I have heard those stories. I used to be a DHS attorney. I have prosecuted cases. And I have seen the faces of those people. Now, they may not all qualify for asylum, and they may not all be telling the truth, but that is not to be prejudged or set aside without having a chance to have a trained individual who understands the law look at those cases. So this matters to me, and that's how I feel about these changes, and I hope that those changes are lasting and come on and make significant steps back to what I believe would be a more fair U.S. system. All right, we always end with questions and answers from you guys, so let's hit them up. Here we go. Hi, I'm a U.S. citizen. My sister has an EB-2 case with a priority date of December 2016. Is there any benefit or a downside if I apply for her? Okay, so what you're talking about is filing an F4 petition, a family-based petition, category F4, brother and sister, for your sister who already has an employment-based petition going. So simply put, there's no downside. There's no negative impact. If you file a second case, wholly separate in the family-based arena for someone who has an employment-based going, nothing's going to happen. All you're going to look at is the timing of each case, which could be faster, which could be slower. The only negative, I think, in this would be whether you spend money at all on something that might not work. Some people do it as a backup plan, and I encourage that. In my office, when I get those kind of consultations, I simply review the timeline for them, and we discuss whether the timeline is feasible or makes any sense. A lot of times people will decide to file the case just for a backup plan for their brother or sister. I completely agree with that. The key to keep in mind would be just the timing. Nothing negative, nothing really positive. It doesn't change the other case. You simply have two cases going, and you wait on the timing for each case to become current. That's about it, all right? Our final question is, does my U.S. citizen fiancé have to be in the United States while the K-1 processes? My fiancé has taken a trip back home to Australia. Can he stay in Australia and wait? So, short answer to that is yes, he can stay in Australia and wait. In fact, the K-1 visa is a visa. The process happens in the United States, but the end result is an approval notice that is then sent to a consulate. That means your fiancé has to go to a consulate, have an appointment, get the visa put in the passport, and then fly back to the United States. It is actually very specific and detailed. When your fiancé arrives in the United States with that visa, there's a package he has to give to the officer at the border, all right? So the K-1 visa, it is a visa, it's not a change of status, is always processed overseas. And your fiancé who is there now can wait to get an approval and have the K-1 visa and fly back, or can come back and forth as you guys wish until the time is right for the K-1 visa to be granted. That's something you have to talk to your attorney about because it's a timing issue about when you file the case and when the case may or may not be ready. You know, flying to Australia is a long flight, so you might want to figure that out with your attorney to make sure you don't just have a quick 1 week, 2 week turnaround, but maybe you can stay in Australia for the entire time. All right, that's our week news for the week. Not a lot going on, but a lot of big changes in the asylum arena. If you have questions for us, we'd love to answer them. Leave them down below. Give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, forward to your friends. We do a lot of free information on this channel, and we do it for you because we want you guys to be up to date and going. Stay safe out there. Bye.